اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام.
Welcome back, viewers. You are still tuned into Prime Live, and today we are thrilled to welcome back to Prime Live, but this time in person, better known as Muhammad Junaid, but even better known as MJ Lee, a world-renowned martial arts champion and author of Kung Fu Part 2, The Untold History. In this insightful book, he delves into the fascinating history of Islam in China, dating back to the 6th century, and reveals the unique styles of Kung Fu, Wushu martial arts developed by Chinese Muslims. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live.
Walaikum salam. It's good to be here in Johannesburg.
Yes.
I haven't been here for a while, and thanks to INX Prime and you guys for having me in studio today.
It's a privilege to have a conversation with you in person. I know the last time we had you on the show via Zoom talking
Yes.
about the African Championships, but today we are also welcoming you back as an author as well, and that's something that a lot of us might not know about you. But you have achieved so much when it comes to martial arts, and not just locally but internationally, being a world champion. What inspired you to delve into becoming an author? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I think essentially my journey started more than 25 years ago professionally. I trained at the Shaolin Temple, the home of Chinese Kung Fu. And essentially it's training with the Shaolin monks up in the Dengfeng Mountains, very different as opposed to what we may be used to in a mundane way in South Africa. And essentially I wanted to train, learn from the best, get an opportunity to represent my country, and along the way become a champion. Those were the plans and the designs that I had. But the Almighty, He is the best of planners. And along this journey in China, He introduced me to the Chinese Muslims, from the Uyghur to the Khoi to the Tajik, Uzbek, Kazakh. And I started mixing with them, went to Xinjiang province where the Uyghur Muslims are, and I started delving into the ancient history of Islam arriving in China, dating back to the early 6th century. So this does not mean I'm going to quote a hadith and Quran, because we have learned scholars. I am a specialist in Kung Fu and Chinese history, and more specifically Islam in China. So I delved into doing research that centered around the old book of Tang. So in English it would be classified as Tang, or the Tang dynasty, going back to the early 6th century. So in the old book of Tang you would find recorded that between 618 and 625 there were visits by Arabs who brought the divine law from the desert to the imperial court. The Tang emperor also heard of the last prophet, and he classified the Prophet Muhammad as Buddha Muhammad, meaning the chosen last one. No proof that he accepted the message, but he welcomed these ambassadors of Islam, who came primarily not for trade, but they came primarily to spread the message of Islam. And as a result of that, the oldest mosque in China, which is the 5th oldest in the world, Hua Yi Sheng Zi, was built before 628, commissioned by the Tang emperor in honor of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So while studying martial arts in China, I encountered this history and I started documenting my experiences. And I thought at some point I'd love to actually tell the story and write a book or two. So in 2019, we wrote Kung Fu Part 1. My journey devoted and dedicated to my late mom, who passed away. A very strong Turkish woman who was extremely passionate and wanted us to become the best version of ourselves. And then I touched very briefly on the history of Islam in China in Part 1. But then when we went into lockdown in early 2020, it gave me an opportunity to sit down and focus on Part 2. So the current book, and that's the reason why I'm in Johannesburg. I'm thankful to INX Prime. I'm thankful to Maulana Shakir Bayat of the Deen team, Mufti Masood Ibrahim, Maulana Muad of Miftahul Khair in Benoni. They've hosted me. In fact, they'll be hosting me for the next couple of days. I'm doing Jumu'ah programs, a youth program with the Deen team, in fact, tonight. And that's all part of promoting the book. So I'll be back in Johannesburg and Pretoria. But the history I've elaborated on it extensively in part 2. So I'm very excited. A lot of hard work obviously lying ahead in as far as promotion is concerned.
Of course, but even harder work to put together something like this. But what an extraordinary journey you have had, to be able to delve into different cultures around the world and the way that Islam is expressed in different parts of the world. And I think it's so important for us to have these kinds of conversations to understand what Islam looks like in different countries. And just before we went live, we had a very brief conversation about the geopolitics that exists in our world and the kind of propaganda, as you said, is shared around the world about how it's really difficult to be Muslim in China and how you don't necessarily associate Islam with China. Yes. However, like you've said, Islam has existed, or, there are remnants of existing Islam in China since the 6th century, which is absolutely astonishing to learn. And this is why it's so interesting to be able to have this conversation. But like you said, part 2 delves into the different Muslim communities that you've had the opportunity to interact with whilst on your stays in China. Can you talk to us more about some of the misconceptions that we all have when it comes to what Islam looks like in China?
The Chinese Muslims are deeply spiritual, and they say beyond a shadow of doubt. In fact, his name is also recorded in the old book of Tang. The father who brought Islam to China, Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, who is known in Mandarin and Cantonese as Hu Ke Shu, he is classified as the father who took Islam to China. The first diplomatic mission that took place in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ was undertaken by Sa'ad and the older brother of Sayyidina Ali, Ja'far bin Abi Talib, who is known as Baytali. His name also corroborated in these books. So as at 2010, and this was 15 years ago, the Muslim population stood at a staggering 100 million Chinese Muslims, over 42,000 masajid. The Xinjiang province, where there's a lot of propaganda, we need to, if we have the capacity, visit Muslims in China, travel there. I've sufficiently conducted my research and I've reached conclusions that the overwhelming evidence that I've seen is that a lot of what we presented with is propaganda, and we need to weed through that propaganda because there are over 100 million Muslims in China. In Xinjiang province, there are over 22 million Muslims in the Northwest Autonomous Region alone, and there are over 20,000 masajid. In China, in total, over 42,000 masajid. And the fact that the 5th oldest mosque in the world, outside of Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, Masjid al-Aqsa, and then the 4th oldest is the An-Najashi Mosque in Ethiopia, because that was the place essentially where our ancestors and the companions during the first flight to Abyssinia, they sought refuge and they were accommodated by a just, wise Coptic Christian king who accepted them and looked after them. So that's the 4th oldest mosque, the An-Najashi. And then the 5th oldest mosque in the world is Huai Shengzi, which dates back to before 628 establishment, commissioned in the early 620s. So it is fascinating. If you have an opportunity, go to China, travel there. Don't just spend 5, 6, 7 days. It's an extensive country. It has over 56 ethnicities. Out of the 56 ethnicities, 8 are classified as Muslim.
It's absolutely fascinating to learn about and kind of debunk a lot of the propaganda that we have absorbed because of social media. And I think it's so important, like you said, to seek the facts. And I think that's great about what this new generation is doing.
Yes.
Is they are a lot more woke, as they call it, and they're looking in further than the information that is being provided to them. And we've learned a lot with Palestine and Gaza in terms of the world and looking at what is shown to us on social media and on our mainstream media and what is actually the truth about what is going on in Gaza and in Palestine. And the same goes for the Muslim communities that we see in China as well. And I think this is an important message to all of us out there to seek the facts and to travel to these parts of the world and experience Islam in the ways that it is celebrated in different countries around the world. But last time we had a conversation, we did talk about the African Championships that, like you said, is coming up once again.
Yes.
Can you briefly talk to us about when that is taking place? And then in closing as well, we also want to know, where can we get a copy of your book?
Okay, that is important because I need to come back to Joburg and Pretoria because the book promo and launch over the next couple of days would mean I'm planting the seed, and I will then be back again. Currently, people are pre-ordering copies. The first batch of pre-ordered copies will be arriving from the printer this coming Thursday, so people can pre-order. There's a WhatsApp number 082 301 9070. You can pre-order copies of part 2, and if you don't have part 1, you can pre-order that as well. There is a small chapter that is known as the hidden chapter in part 2, Kung Fu, the Untold History, that explains why we introduced the Africa Youth Kung Fu Championship. If I look at my honorable teacher, Mufti Masood Ibrahim, who is an amazing leader in the Gauteng region and even in South Africa, he has so many students from about 7-8 different African countries. And that speaks to development on the continent. And I have so much of respect for the work that he does and the learned scholars attached to their institute. But a couple of years ago, we focused on the Africa Youth Kung Fu Championship. Over the years, I was traveling to China for training, and then along the way, I've managed to represent my country across 4 or 5 different continents, become an undefeated world champion. But I always thought, what can we do for our African youth? Socially, economically, politically, conditions are not always in their favor. And then I thought at some point we should try and host an annual Africa Youth Championship, work on getting partners that will sponsor transport accommodation for the SADC region and bring in 10 African countries into the mother city so that our African youth can get an opportunity to compete on a professional level, and we can see talents being showcased, and maybe we can even fast track it. So we started with the embryonic phase and idea in 2023. It was only South Africa, Botswana. Earlier this year, which you spoke to us about on INX Prime, we hosted 6 countries. Coming 1st and 2nd of Feb 2025 in Cape Town at Fairbairn College, we are hosting 10 African countries, and our SA youth team that I coach, they are the defending champions. So literally there will be more than 150 athletes from 10 African countries, aged 11 to 22. But I take it back to the first flight to Abyssinia by the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. They acquired refuge and they got a safe haven on the African continent, nowhere else. And that is not a coincidence. Therefore, it is my estimation and assertion that as Muslims, we are indebted to this African continent, and we should play our part in whatever way in ensuring we can develop, we can produce, and we can play our part in ensuring that our continent takes the forefront, because it has an important role to play geopolitically in the world. So I think from that perspective, I'm trying in a small way as a martial arts champion to bring African youth together and to showcase their talents.
No, I think that's very beautifully and very powerfully said. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been, incredibly insightful in the sense that I have learned so much from our conversation today. But also thank you for creating such an incredible platform for African youth to enjoy martial arts. As someone who did martial arts as I was young, I know the benefit that it has for the mind, body and soul. Amazing. And bringing that kind of opportunity and platform for young Africans is such an amazing feat. And to see how much it's grown in the short space of time that we've had those 2 conversations.
Absolutely. Important conversations.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been incredibly insightful.
Sure. Thank you.
Viewers at home, that was MJ Lee. You absolutely need to get yourself a copy of both of his books if you don't have them as yet. He has shared the WhatsApp number. Please do pre-order your books. It's so important for us to open our perspectives to what Islam looks like in other parts of the world, but also understanding the cultural history that does exist within other parts of the world and how old they have been there. The remnants of Islam has existed in China for centuries, for decades. We absolutely need to open our mindsets up to explore the way Islam is celebrated and expressed in other parts of the world. And if you would like to get a copy of the book, please do make sure you send through your WhatsApp to get a pre-order. You can also follow him on social media platforms to get your copy as well, or if you require any further information.